So sorry about that. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty, so we're going to call this section number 2. So I want to just point out in the Bible, one of the places that should flabbergast anybody, even if you're not a Christian. I didn't need to be a Christian to recognize that there's something hugely wrong with this particular passage in the Bible. This is Habakkuk, just a small part of the Bible, uh, one of the prophets of Habakkuk in the Old Testament. And if you go to chapter 3, starting at verse 3, and I'll read that on. God came from Teman. Now, when does it ever say that God came from anywhere? God is the Alpha and the Omega, no beginning, no end. You don't even have to be a Christian to know that. But here it says God came from Teman. Really? All right. And the Holy One from Mount Paran. Was that right? So Jesus, in other words, came from Paran? Or are they talking about Jesus? Doesn't strike me that they are. Paran Selah. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. And his brightness was as the light. He had, and we all know, of course, that Satan is considered to be that of light, like the morning star, very often referred to as a morning star. So, it's kind of in its own subtle way there, referring not to Jesus, although for people that aren't paying attention, well, that's Jesus. No, it's not. And it also says he had horns coming out of his hand, and there was the hiding of his power. Really? So God has horns, and without the horns, he would have no power? I don't hardly think so. Anybody that's doing any kind of thinking would recognize this. There's other places in the Bible that are hugely changed. And I'm talking about Bibles. This is a Bible that I'm holding up, King James Version. And it's King James Version that I'll refer to, although all Bibles are being changed hugely. It also says now, instead of the lion shall lie down with the lamb, it says the lion shall lie down with the wolf. Now, we all know that the wolf is what we need to be careful of. Jesus said, a wolf in sheep's clothing. We know that that's the enemy. Also, in terms of wineskins, where throughout the Bible it says you don't put new wine into old wineskins, otherwise you burst the wineskin. Now it says bottles. And I don't care if you're even looking at a Bible that's 100 years of age. It's a King James Version Bible, because I've done that. A friend of mine who had a 100-year-old Bible, she looked at it, she was dumbfounded. Now, the reason that this is not being recognized is that a good many Christians are not reading their Bibles. But I've pointed this out to even pastors. And know what I receive in return? Silence. Nothing said. Also, one of the things that upsets me considerably, Jacob Lorber, who was a scribe for God. He was born, you can look him up on the internet, Jacob Lorber, Lorber. He was actually born in Austria, I believe. He was either a composer or musician, and born in 1800. And his career was about to take off when he heard God say to him that he was going to be working for God. And for the rest of his life, he took, you could say, dictation from God himself. Wrote numerous books. Household of God is one of them, as well as, and the one that I've read twice. Now, I'm a slow reader, and I usually don't read anything twice. And this one brought tears to my eyes both times. 3 Days in the Temple. That's one of the books. This is Jesus, a 12-year-old boy, and it's referred to just lightly in the Bible, where Jesus goes to the temple with his parents. His parents lose track of him, and they look all over, finally meet up with him and say, well, where have you been? We've looked everywhere. And he says, did you not know I would be about my Father's business? Well, this was his Father's business that he was taking care of. And if anybody wants to look at that, 3 Days in the Temple, Jacob Lorber, you can find it on the internet. You can download it on PFD, which I've done. I also took that, as well as Love Letters from Jesus, which is now Jesus talking to this world. There's not a doubt in my mind. And a lot of those letters, it refers back to Jacob Lorber's writings as well, because it's God talking, and it's called the Third Testament now. But the church, no way, and I've handed out thousands of flyers on this, and also to pastors taking it. There isn't one of them that's been able to say to me, you're wrong on this. This isn't God. Because, of course, it would have to stand up. It would not be contradictory to the Bible, which it isn't. And it's God telling us about these times, not only about things biblically to get into further understandings, but also things that are referring to that refer to our world as it is today, such as the RFID chip, which is being put in place. 1.2 billion people in India have received the mark of the microchip. And just like it says in the Bible, you won't be able to buy or sell. They can't buy or sell. They've not accepted it for the Christians that know what it is, because it is the mark of the beast, and it will change your DNA. And a lot of the churches are not talking about this. You got to start wondering, why is that? So it's caused a lot of disappointment for me, because this is only the second church that I'm going to. I'm a fairly new Christian. So it makes me scratch my head. But I have to come to the conclusion that the churches are somehow in league with the other side. Now, how would that be? Well, it strikes me that, for one, in the States, they call it a 501c3, which is your tithing in terms of getting a tax receipt, so that everything that you get and the church gets and so forth, it's all tax exempt. So right there in itself, you're in the hip pocket of the enemy. And in order to get that, and they don't refer to a church as a church, but as a charitable organization, which means that at any time you don't live up to whatever regulations that they say, then they can disqualify you. You're no longer qualified for that 501c3. So the churches don't want to play around with that. So that's one of the big things. And there's all kinds of changes, and not talking about God actually speaking to the world today. So the churches don't want to touch it. They just literally don't want to touch it. So ultimately, I realize this is a bit of a rant, but it has been a huge disappointment for me. I've taken it to the other church, and the pastor there gave me nothing but silence. He never once approached me, even though I went to that church for roughly 10 years, never once approached me and said, Dan, you know, you're wrong. Quite the opposite. I think he was quite happy that I was sharing some of this information. And with this church also that I'm now going to, I have to say that I'm finding that, you know, they just want to back off on that. They don't mind that I know that and share it with other people, but they don't want to become involved. It's that sort of thing. So what is the solution to this? What's the alternative? It strikes me, well, if you want to go to church, recognize that this is what they're tied to, and that in some ways they're not going to share some of these higher truths. They don't want to get into areas that's going to make people maybe uncomfortable. They don't want to talk about the RFID chip, even to the detriment of their own people. They want to keep sort of a comfortableness, just a go along to get along kind of an approach is what I'm seeing. I think ultimately the solution to it is for each individual to start taking the church, just as in the book of Acts, out to the public, out to the people themselves. For my part, I deliver flyers. 100 a week is pretty much what I've committed myself to, and to God. And I've been doing it now for several years. And a lot of people that I meet at the doorsteps and stuff like that, and I share some of the information, I can see that they got such a thirst, such a hunger, and they understand it better than a lot of so-called Christians, because they're up on some of the stuff, and the church isn't talking about it. And here's the connecting of the dots of some of these things, like the mark of the beast. Well, that's the RFID chip. And other things that are going on in today's world. So at any rate, I think that's ultimately, and it says in the Bible, you'll know them by their fruits. If you look at most churches, you'll find that there's not a whole lot of fruit. There's not a whole lot of healing. They don't talk about casting out demons. They make a referral, and I've heard Christians say that are pastors, that if you're a Christian, you don't have to worry about demons, because you're not going to be bothered with that. Well, you won't be possessed, and it's not going to stop you from going to heaven. But while you're here on this planet, you can be a Christian. You can be sure that you will be attacked, and you will have to deal with demons. The fact that the church is, again, reluctant to talk about any of this and just want to keep comfortable conversations, and when we're going to have the next dance or whatever it is, that's not going to help the Christians. That's not going to relieve them of tremendous torment that they could be going through for years. I had demons myself, of which I had to get rid of. And the only way I got rid of them is through John Ramirez, in a book that I got from off of the YouTube, because he is on YouTube as well. Some of my highest teachings actually come from YouTube. Extol Yeshua always, John Ramirez, Unmasking the Devil. And I would refer to anybody, or Derek Prince, who is also an amazing, he got all kinds of background in terms of casting out demons and keeping one free of one ever receiving them. And it's a constant battle. Anyways, that's what I'm getting to, is that we start now having to actually go out. When you see somebody that's ill, just comment on it lightly. Is there something that I can do? Can I pray for you? Do you believe in the power of prayer? Because I have seen many healings, and truthfully, I have. And it might initially might take some courage on your part to ask them, but once you start doing some of this, I think you'll be carrying on with a true church, the church that Jesus Christ wants. Thank you for listening.